Ayanda was only 23, living in a small rented room on the edge of Maputo. She didn't have much, just a narrow bed, a few clothes she had stitched herself, and a radio she listened to every night before sleeping. Life was not easy, but it was hers. She dreamed of starting her own sewing business one day, though for now she earned little by repairing dresses for neighbors. That night, the sky turned angry. The wind grew louder, pushing against the windows like fists. Then the cyclone arrived. The storm ripped through the town with a roar so strong it felt like the world itself was breaking apart. Roofs tore off and flew into the darkness. Walls cracked and fell. Water gushed down the streets, swallowing everything in its path. Ayanda held onto her doorframe, her heart racing as the roof above her shook. In minutes, her small room collapsed, the walls giving way like paper. She stumbled into the rain, carrying only a torn bag with a few belongings. The streets were chaos, people shouting, water rising, debris everywhere. She had nothing left, not even a dry place to sit. Shivering and soaked to the bone, Ayanda stood under the pouring rain, watching her life disappear in the flood. The only thought that gave her strength was her parents. Their house stood on higher ground, large and safe. Maybe, she told herself, they would open the door to her. Maybe this storm would bring her back to the family she had lost. Ayanda dragged her tired body through the flooded streets, the torn bag pressing into her shoulder. Her feet were blistered from walking barefoot in dirty water. Her dress clung to her skin, and every step felt heavier than the storm had not stopped raging, but she kept moving because she had only one destination in mind, her parents' house. It sat on higher ground, big and strong, untouched by the floods that had swallowed her small room. If she could just make it there, she thought she would be safe. By the time she reached the tall gates, her strength was almost gone. She stood there for a moment, staring at the big house that used to feel like home. Her heart pounded, not just from exhaustion, but from fear. She had not spoken to her parents in months. Still, she whispered to herself, they're my mother and father. They can't turn me away. With trembling hands, she knocked. At first, there was no answer, only the sound of the wind howling through the night. She knocked again, harder this time, her voice breaking as she called out, Mama, Baba, please, it's me, Ayanda. Finally, the door opened. Her mother stood there, dry and neat in a housecoat, while Ayanda dripped water onto the doorstep. Behind her mother, her father appeared, his arms crossed tightly. For a second, Ayanda's heart lifted. She thought they would pull her inside, wrap her in a blanket, and tell her everything would be all right. Instead, her mother's eyes grew cold. Her father's face was like stone. He spoke first, his voice firm and sharp. We can't have you here, Ayanda. We told you, you're on your own. Ayanda froze, unable to believe what she had heard. The storm roared around her, but nothing sounded louder than those words. Her lips parted, trying to form a reply, but nothing came out. She felt the weight of years pressing down on her, the years when her parents had favored her brother, when she had been called the weak one, the disappointment. Please, she whispered, her voice barely audible. I have nowhere else to go. But her mother didn't answer. She only reached forward and closed the door. It clicked shut, firm and final, leaving Ayanda staring at the wood grain as the rain poured harder. She stood there for a long time, knocking softly again, begging under her breath, but no one opened the door. When she finally stepped back, her body shaking, she felt a pain deeper than hunger or cold. The storm outside was merciless, but the storm inside her chest was worse. She had lost her home, her belongings, and now, in the moment she needed them most, her family too. Ayanda turned away from the house, her torn bag hanging at her side. The night swallowed her, and with every step back into the darkness, she understood she was truly alone. Ayanda stumbled through the flooded streets until she found a broken bus stop, its roof half torn away, metal poles bent like straws. It wasn't much, but it was the only shelter she could find. She sat on the cold cement bench, clutching her wet bag to her chest. Rain still poured in through the cracks, soaking her hair, her clothes, her skin, but at least it was better than standing out in the open. Her body trembled, partly from the cold, partly from the ache in her heart. She leaned her head against the pole and listened to the storm rage on. The wind screamed as if it wanted to sweep her away. The floodwater rushed through the streets carrying trash and broken wood, and the night felt endless. But the worst noise was not outside. It was in her mind, echoing her father's voice. We can't have you here, Ayanda. You're on your own. Those words were louder than thunder. They cut sharper than the shards of glass scattered across the street. As the hours dragged on, memories began to flood her, uninvited. She remembered being a little girl, standing by the doorway as her parents praised her brother, Wazi. Our pride, they would call him, clapping him on the back after every school award, every little achievement. Wazi was strong, confident, the son they showed off to neighbors. And Ayanda? She was the quiet one, the one her father dismissed as too soft, the one her mother scolded for dreaming too much. Even when she learned to sew, turning scraps of cloth into beautiful things, it was never enough. "Your brother will take care of us," they always said. "You need to toughen up." Now, sitting alone in the storm, their rejection felt final, like a stamp on her life that said she would never belong, not even to the people who had brought her into this world. She hugged herself tighter, her chest heavy with both anger and grief. How could they close the door when she had nothing left? How could blood turn away blood? The night dragged on. The water crept closer, her shoes squelched with mud, and her body ached from exhaustion. Every now and then, she thought she heard footsteps, but it was only the storm playing tricks. She was completely alone. And yet, in that emptiness, something inside her began to stir. Ayanda pressed her lips together, wiped the rain from her face, and whispered into the dark, almost as if she were speaking to herself and to the storm at once. "If I survive this, I'll never ask them again. Never." Her voice was shaky, but the promise felt real. She knew she might not see the morning, but if she did, her life would change. She would no longer beg for love from those who had none to give. She would stand on her own, even if it broke her. And with that vow, she sat in the broken bus stop, the storm raging around her, waiting for the night to end. Ayanda didn't know when she drifted into a shallow sleep under the broken bus stop. Her body was sore, her clothes clung to her skin, and her stomach growled with hunger. The storm had quieted a little, though the wind still whistled through the empty street. She thought she might not wake up at all. Then, through her haze, she felt a hand on her shoulder. "Child, are you alive?" a woman's voice asked gently. Ayanda blinked and looked up. A strong, older woman with a bright scarf tied around her head stood in front of her. She had mud on her boots, a flashlight in one hand, and eyes that seemed full of both strength and kindness. "Come," the woman said. "You can't stay here. It's not safe." Her name was Mama Thandai, a volunteer who had been walking through the flooded streets all night, searching for survivors. Without hesitation, she pulled Ayanda to her feet and guided her through the muddy path. Ayanda's legs shook, but Mama Thandai's hand was steady, as if saying, "You're not alone anymore." They reached a relief shelter, an old school building turned into a safe place for storm victims. Inside, mats were spread across the floor, children huddled against their mothers, and volunteers carried buckets of water and blankets. The air smelled of damp clothes and smoke from a small cooking fire outside, but to Ayanda, it smelled like hope. For the first time since the cyclone began, she lay down on a mat. It wasn't soft, but it was dry. Around her were strangers, people who had lost homes, families, everything they owned. Yet in that crowded room, Ayanda felt more cared for than she had at her parents' doorstep. No one pushed her away. No one told her she was weak. She closed her eyes and let the exhaustion finally pull her into real sleep. The next day, Ayanda noticed how much work there was to do. Children cried for food, the elderly needed help walking, and mothers struggled to calm their babies. Something inside her stirred. She couldn't just sit and do nothing. She began sweeping the floor with an old broom, then helped stir the pot of porridge, then rocked a crying child to sleep. Day after day, she did more. She patched up torn clothes with a needle and thread she found in her bag, cleaned mats, carried buckets of water, and offered a kind word to those who were grieving. She didn't speak loudly or try to stand out, but people started to notice her. "That girl has strength," some whispered. "She works like she's one of the staff." Ayanda herself didn't realize it, but the storm that had stripped her of everything was also uncovering something new. Her quiet strength, her ability to care for others even when she had almost nothing herself. For the first time in her life, she was beginning to see what she was truly capable of. Weeks passed, and slowly the sky cleared over Maputo. The cyclone had moved on, but what it left behind was heartbreaking. Whole streets were reduced to piles of broken bricks and twisted metal. Trees lay uprooted, boats were stranded in the middle of roads, and the smell of damp wood and mud hung heavy in the air. Families wandered through the ruins, trying to salvage whatever scraps remained of their lives. Ayanda stayed at the relief shelter with Mama Thandai and the others, but she knew they couldn't depend on handouts forever. The city needed to rebuild, and so did she. One morning, she walked through the destroyed neighborhood and saw children shivering in torn clothes, mothers trying to wash muddy garments in dirty water, and men wearing ripped shirts as they hauled broken wood. Something tugged at her heart. She didn't have money or a house to give, but she still had her hands, and she knew how to sew. She found an old sewing machine donated to the shelter. It was rusty and stiff, but after oiling it with care, it began to work again. At first, she started small, stitching up children's school uniforms, patching trousers, repairing dresses so that families could at least wear something whole. Neighbors lined up quietly, holding out their bundles of damaged clothing, and Ayanda worked late into the night, the machine humming steadily under her hand. Word began to spread. People said, "Go to Ayanda, she can fix it. She won't charge much." Some gave her a few coins, others brought food in exchange, and a few simply said thank you. Ayanda didn't mind. For the first time, she felt useful in a way that filled her heart. She was giving dignity back to people who had lost everything. Soon, she realized the need was bigger than just patching. Children had outgrown their uniforms, mothers had no proper dresses, and men needed sturdy clothes for rebuilding work. Ayanda began designing new pieces from scraps of fabric, turning old sheets into skirts, curtains into shirts, and leftover cloth into tiny jackets for babies. Her creativity caught everyone's eye. Families who couldn't afford the market now had affordable clothes stitched with care. What started as a small act grew into something larger. With Mama Thandai's encouragement, Ayanda named her little effort Ayanda's Hand. She liked the sound of it, because truly, it was her hands that were building her future from ashes. Soon, a corner of the shelter became her workshop, with piles of cloth stacked in neat bundles and neighbors dropping by daily to request her help. She worked tirelessly, her fingers sore, her eyes tired, but her spirit stronger than ever. Every stitch she made was not just a thread in fabric, but a thread in her new life. From the ruins of the storm, Ayanda was quietly sewing together something powerful, a place for herself in the community, and a hope that could not be washed away. Ayanda's sewing corner quickly became more than just a place to fix clothes. Every day, new faces showed up at the shelter, carrying bundles of fabric, asking her for help. People began speaking about her in the markets and in the neighborhoods that were slowly rebuilding. "There's a young woman named Ayanda," they said. "She can make something out of nothing." One afternoon, a small group of visitors came to see her. They were from an NGO working in Maputo, helping families recover after the cyclone. At first, Ayanda thought they were simply there to drop off donations. But after watching her work, her steady hands, the neat piles of finished clothes, the way she patiently listened to everyone, they pulled her aside. "You're doing something special here," one of them told her. "What if we helped you do it on a bigger scale?" Ayanda blinked, unsure if she had heard right. She had never imagined anyone noticing her, let alone offering support. The NGO explained that they could provide sewing machines, fabric, and even a small grant to start a proper training center. The idea wasn't just for Ayanda to sew, but to teach other women who had lost everything in the storm how to sew as well. At first, Ayanda felt overwhelmed. Could she really lead others? She remembered her parents' harsh words, the way they had always said she was too soft, too weak. But then she looked around the shelter. She saw widows who had no income, young mothers with hungry babies, girls her own age with nothing but despair in their eyes. If she didn't step up, who would? So she agreed. With the NGO's support, a small building near the shelter was transformed into a sewing workshop. Bright machines were lined up on wooden tables, rolls of fabric filled the corners, and a painted sign at the door read, Ayanda's Hands Training Center. On the first day, 10 women showed up, nervous, tired, unsure of themselves. Ayanda welcomed them with a smile and said, "We will build together." Day by day, she taught them the basics, how to thread a needle, how to cut fabric, how to stitch evenly. The women laughed when they made mistakes, clapped when someone finished their first shirt, and slowly began to see themselves not as victims of the storm, but as creators of something new. They started making school uniforms, work clothes, and colorful dresses that brightened the gray streets of the city. Soon, Ayanda was no longer just the girl sewing in the corner. She was leading meetings, organizing orders, and encouraging her team when they doubted themselves. The same voice that once whispered she was weak now told her she was strong. For the first time in her life, Ayanda saw herself as a leader. And as she stood in the busy workshop, surrounded by the sound of sewing machines and women's laughter, she thought of her parents. They had never believed in her, but it no longer mattered. She had built something real, something powerful, with her own hands. Months passed, and life in Maputo slowly began to heal. Shops reopened, schools welcomed children again, and the city buzzed with the sounds of rebuilding. Ayanda's training center had become a busy place, full of women stitching, laughing, and finding hope in their work. For her, every day felt like a step further away from the night she had stood crying at her parents' door. But in another part of town, trouble was brewing. Her parents, once proud owners of a thriving business, began to face difficulty. At first, it was small, delayed payments, suppliers refusing credit, orders drying up. The whispers started quietly in the market stalls. Did you hear? Their son Lwazi invested in something risky. Some said he had put all the family's money into new projects that promised quick profit. Others said he was careless, spending more than he earned. Whatever the truth, the golden boy who was once the pride of the family had led them straight into disaster. The collapse came quickly. One morning, shop doors that had always been open stayed shut. Workers stood outside, shaking their heads, saying they hadn't been paid in weeks. Neighbors who had once admired the family now lowered their voices, whispering behind their backs. For the first time, Ayanda's parents knew the sting of shame and the heavy weight of desperation. They tried to keep up appearances. Her father still walked with his head high. Her mother still wore neat clothes, but in private arguments filled their home. The savings were gone. The business was gone. And Loazi, the son they had trusted above all, had no answers. Eventually, there was nowhere left to turn. Their friends avoided them, their neighbors pitied them, and the same doors that had always been open to them were now closed. That was when they thought of Ayanda, the daughter they had turned away in the storm. One evening, as the sewing machines hummed in her workshop, Ayanda heard a soft knock at the door. She wiped her hands on her skirt and went to open it. Standing there were her parents. They looked smaller than she remembered. Her father's shoulders, once so square and proud, were slumped. Her mother's eyes darted nervously, unable to meet her daughter's gaze. Behind them, Loazi stood silent, his confidence stripped away. For a long moment, no one spoke. The sound of laughter from the women inside the workshop floated into the silence. Finally, her father cleared his throat. Ayanda, he began, his voice low, almost trembling. We need your help. Her mother nodded quickly, adding, Times have been hard. You know we love you. We just had no choice that night. Ayanda stood in the doorway, her heart steady. She had once knocked on their door, soaked and desperate, and they had turned her away. Now the tables had turned. Her parents, who once saw her as weak, were standing on her doorstep, broken and humbled, asking for the very thing they had denied her, shelter and support. Ayanda stood in the doorway of her workshop, the warm light from inside spilling onto the street where her parents stood. Behind her, the steady hum of sewing machines continued, mixed with the sound of women chatting and laughing. It felt like two different worlds were meeting, the one she had built with her own hands, and the one that had once rejected her. Her parents shifted uncomfortably. Her mother tried to smile, but it was weak and nervous. Ayanda, she said softly, you know we love you. We had no choice that night. The house was full. The storm was dangerous. You must understand. Her father cleared his throat, his voice heavy. Things are different now. We need your support. We see what you've built here, and we are proud. Truly proud. Ayanda listened without interrupting. A younger version of herself might have burst out crying or shouted back, demanding to know how they could have abandoned her when she had nothing. But she wasn't that girl anymore. She had grown stronger, steadier, and she no longer needed their approval. Her parents kept speaking, circling around the past, trying to paint it softer than it had been. They wanted her to forget the cold slam of the door, the night she had nearly frozen under a broken bus stop. But Ayanda remembered it all, every word, every ache, every tear. She took a slow breath, looked directly into their eyes, and spoke with a calmness that surprised even herself. The night of the storm, I knocked on your door. I begged you to let me in, and you turned me away. Her voice didn't tremble. I found my own shelter. I built my own home. And I built this place where women can stand strong together. Her words hung in the air, sharper than any shout could have been. Her mother lowered her eyes. Her father's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Even Loazi shifted uncomfortably, as if he wanted to disappear into the shadows. Ayanda didn't slam the door in their faces. She didn't need to. The strength in her voice was enough to make clear where the boundaries now lay. She had survived their rejection, survived the storm, and risen into something they never thought she could be. Behind her, one of the women from the center called out, Ayanda, we finished the uniform. The workshop buzzed with life and purpose, a world that her parents had no part in creating. Ayanda turned back to her parents, her face calm but unyielding. I don't hate you, she said quietly, but I don't need you anymore. The storm taught me that. She stepped back inside, leaving them on the doorstep, not with anger but with a final truth. They had lost her long before this moment. And she had already found a new family, one she had chosen, one that had chosen her in return. A few weeks later, Ayanda found herself standing in front of Maputo's city hall, the morning sun shining bright against the white wall. A large crowd had gathered, community members, journalists with flashing cameras, and volunteers from all over the city. The mayor of Maputo had called her forward to honor her work. It still felt unreal to her. Only months ago, she had been sleeping under a broken bus stop with nothing but a torn bag. Now, people were clapping for her. Ayanda wore a simple dress she had sewn herself, made from bright blue fabric with patterns of gold. It wasn't expensive, but it was beautiful and carried her pride in every stitch. As she stepped up to the microphone, the applause rose louder. She spotted her parents in the crowd, standing toward the back. They looked different, quieter, smaller somehow, with regret written across their faces. Loazi stood beside them, no longer the shining golden sun, but just another face in the crowd. The mayor spoke warmly about Ayanda's hands, about the women who had been trained, the jobs created, and the hope restored in the community. Ayanda turned tragedy into strength, the mayor said, raising a hand toward her. She is a reminder that true leaders rise not when things are easy, but when the storm has passed. The cameras flashed, journalists leaned forward, and one reporter called out the question that everyone seemed to want answered. Ayanda, what gave you the strength to build this movement? Ayanda paused. She thought of the storm, the rejection at her parents' door, the long cold night under the bus stop. She thought of the women at the shelter, the sewing machines humming, the children laughing in clothes she had stitched. And then she lifted her chin and spoke clearly, her voice steady enough to carry over the crowd. Rejection was my greatest teacher, she said. The night I was turned away, I thought I had lost everything. But what I found was strength inside myself that I never knew was there. That strength is what built this movement, not just for me, but for every woman who was told she was not enough. The crowd erupted in applause. Some people cheered, others wiped their eyes. Behind the flashes of the cameras, Ayanda's parents lowered their heads. They had no words, only the heavy silence of regret. Ayanda didn't look at them for long. She focused instead on the women from her center, who were clapping the loudest, shouting her name with pride. They were her family now, the ones who had stood beside her when she had nothing. As the ceremony ended and flowers were placed in her hands, Ayanda smiled, not because she wanted recognition, but because she finally understood. She had turned pain into purpose, and that purpose now belonged to everyone who believed in it. The storm had taken her past, but it had also given her a future. Ayanda's parents came to her again after the ceremony, this time with softer voices and lowered eyes. They spoke of their troubles, of the debts they could not pay, of the business that was gone. They hinted that maybe she could give them some money, maybe help them get back on their feet. Ayanda listened quietly, her hands folded in her lap. She felt no anger, no desire to shout. The storm had already taught her everything she needed to know. At last, she looked at them and said calmly, "The night I needed you, you closed your door. I learned to survive without you. Now it's your turn. You'll have to stand on your own." Her words were not cruel, but firm. It was not revenge, it was a boundary. She had carried the pain of rejection, and now she understood that some lessons could not be softened. Her parents looked down, unable to reply, and slowly walked away. That evening, Ayanda walked through her training center. The sound of sewing machines filled the air, mixed with bursts of laughter from women joking as they worked. Children played in the corner, their mothers smiling with hope for the first time in months. Ayanda paused, her eyes taking in the room. This was her family now, women who had chosen to stand beside her, who believed in her, and whom she believed in too. She didn't need to cling to the love that had once been denied her. She had built something stronger. With a small smile, she whispered to herself, "This is home." And as the women kept sewing and laughing, Ayanda stepped forward, her future alive with the family she had created by choice, not by blood.